Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar on inclusive communications and inclusive design. So I will start with a few housekeeping rules. Please use the chat function on your right-hand side, I think, at the top of your screen, to ask questions. So we have 10-15 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat function. We will answer them on the go or at the end of the session. Also, we'd like to ask you all to keep your microphone on mute and camera off, unless you present, of course. As an attendee, you will be muted as soon as you join, hopefully. This is what Teams is supposed to do at the moment. If you're experiencing technical issues, please drop us a message in the chat function and we'll do our best to help. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be later shared on the DNI IMechE YouTube channel. So don't worry if the link to the recorded webinar will be shared with all next week. So I think that's all, and we will move on to the agenda. So today we'll be looking at why inclusive communications matter, examples of inclusive communications, the latest updates to the IMechE branding guidelines, and we'll hear from our wonderful Chris and Emily on their personal experiences with inclusive comms and design. And now I'll stop sharing for a moment because I just want all of us to be on the screen and everyone to see us really well. And if I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. So I'll give it a start. So my name is Christina and I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the IMechE. And Margaret Ann, would you like to introduce yourself? You're on mute, by the way. This is the trick all the time with the webinars, isn't it?
I'm Margaret Ann Orgill and I'm Corporate Communications Manager at IMechE, so I manage all that, a lot of our external and member communications, and also my team manages our brand. So inclusive communications are extremely important to us in all areas of our work.
Thank you. Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Harford, recently elected fellow at the IMechE, and I work in the Office of the Chief Engineer for the UK Atomic Energy Authority as a design authority.
Thank you so much, Emily. And Chris?
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Hoskin. I'm Technical Director.
We've lost Chris a little bit. Chris, I hope you can hear us. We slightly lost you there. We'll give Chris a moment. Hopefully he can return. Okay. We'll probably continue and hopefully Chris can rejoin us very soon and he will introduce himself. Thank you so much. And I will reshare the PowerPoint back. Hopefully everyone can see it. If you can't, please let me know. So let's start. So why does it matter? So what I wanted to talk to you about is inclusive language and inclusive design, of course. And inclusion, as you know, is one of our first values at the IMechE, along with integrity, innovation, and impact. And if we get inclusion right, we will get everything else right. And I'll pause here because I can see Chris just joined back. Chris, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry about that. I've got no idea what happened.
No problem. Sorry.
That is fine. Yes, so sorry about that, but my name's Chris Hoskin. I'm Technical Director at IMechE Consulting. We do rolling stock train engineering. So that's buying new trains and raising line speed and things like that. I'm also the EDI champion for the company. Yeah, and I'm here to talk about my own experience.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you, Emily. And we really, really appreciate that you found the time to join us here today. It really brings these things to life when we approach it from the real experiences. Okay, so let's go back to where we just stopped. So why does it matter? So the inclusive language supports a safe and welcoming workplace culture where people feel that they belong and accepted for who they are. And here I want to just provide a very quick example. So imagine Ben was interviewing for a job where he would have to relocate. And the interviewer looked at Ben's wedding ring and said, well, I bet your wife would really love to move to this new location. The problem is that Ben is gay and he's married to a man. So imagine what it is like to be in Ben's position. So now Ben has a few options and none of them are great. So the first option, he can pause and correct the interviewer, but he can assume from that that the interviewer might be biased against people who aren't straight, because he's shown that through his language, and maybe that wasn't the intention initially, but that is the feeling. Or the second, he could say nothing and let him keep on assuming then Ben has a female partner. But then other questions arise. If I get this job, is this company a good place for me? Can I be myself? Will I be welcomed and supported and heard and seen? So lots of questions running through Ben's mind as he's during the interview process. And that is just because of one non-inclusive word, wife. And that, if he, for example, if the interviewer didn't say, if they said partner, Ben then would have the feeling that the company keeps in mind that some of us are LGBTQ+, and one word can make such a big difference to how Ben is feeling as being part of this potential new organization, and he'll feel welcome and seen and heard. So now it's a good time to actually pause and reflect. What words do make you feel seen and included, and what words to make you feel excluded? And feel free to drop them in the chat function. It would be really nice to see how that sounds like. And here I wanted to just run through a few gender neutral language. So gender specific language like guys or chairman isn't inclusive. And male specific words create male specific mental models. So you can see on the right hand side, there are a few words showing how we used to say before and what is the recommended version. So we do encourage you to say chair, not chairman. We do encourage you to say partner, not husband or wife, to be as inclusive as possible. And of course, there are many, many other words, and you can learn more from the Inclusive Communications Guide provided by the IMechE on the D&I webpage. But an important note to make is that language is evolving, and what has been acceptable a few years ago might not be acceptable today. The final thought I wanted to share with you is perspective taking. So have you ever found yourself thinking, well, I wouldn't mind if someone said that to me? And that can be a real blocker to inclusive language, and is usually a failure of putting yourself in other people's shoes. So perspective taking is really a cognitive skill that involves projecting into another person's point of view. So you need to do a bit more additional work, and can really be tough to imagine how other people would perceive something or some words or a situation. And if you don't know, I'd encourage you to ask. You'll be really surprised by the positive reaction you receive. It is really worth, because our reaction to situations and things can be really, really driven by our experiences in the past. Asking the question is to the person, I'm not sure how to say this. I'm really, not confident talking about this topic. Could you help me understand this a little better? So this is some curiosity. So put in some curiosity and courage to ask questions, and I'm sure that will spark only a positive response from other people. And I'll stop here, and I'll hand over to Margaret Ann to speak about our branding guidelines.
Still muted there. Thank you very much for the great introduction. And as some of you will know that we've spent a lot of time recently. We've upgraded our brand guidelines, and one of the key aspects of that is making sure that they're inclusive and they're accessible. We've got our fonts, Serifa, Active, and Verdana, and those are fonts which we've chosen particularly for their accessibility. And I just wanted to show you that our new color palette, and you can see, sorry, if I'm staying on that one. And what it is that we've changed some of the colors, and you'll see that we've got a new color purple on the right, and the other colors have been slightly adjusted. And the key thing about the palette is that we've worked really hard to make sure the contrast between the colors work well and meet guideline standards. So the two lines at the bottom are what are called background colors, and the two lines at the top are accent colors. And so when you combine the background colors with the accent colors, the contrast is at the right standard. And as Chris will tell you later how important that is. And, you know, we've, apart from two colors that don't quite meet the standard we're looking for, everything else works. So please do use the palette, bear that in mind. And then on the next slide, just to show you some of the colors, if you don't mind moving to the next one, please. Christine, yeah, just talking about the contrast checker. And you can see that this is, we've used a web AM3, a professional contrast checker, and all the colors have been worked through that. So you can see 3 examples of how our colors work on the different backgrounds. And then on the right of the screen, there's an example of when you're trying colors, say the yellow on the gray, they just didn't work. They failed the test. So that is how we check. We look at the colors really carefully of the different contrasts to make sure that they, you know, that they are visible and that they meet the standards that are required. And on this note about contrast, I'd like to explain to you how come we've had the joy of having Chris on the call today. Apart from he's also a fellow of IMechE, Chris got in touch last year with me about our birdcage walk project to point out that some of the documents on the website were very difficult for somebody who's visually impaired to read. It was a light grey on a white background, and I have to say, fortunately, they weren't our documents. They were documents provided by the architect, and we had them corrected. We had the font, the colour contrast corrected, and it really drew home to me how important contrasts are and how important accessibility is. So when we were planning this webinar, I got in touch with Chris and asked if he would like to come and join us, and we're delighted that he's accepted the invitation. So I'll hand over to Chris, who can give you some examples of how important accessibility is to someone with visual impairment.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick drive through my disability and how that affects me, and how it's also made me notice things and then drive to change them where I can. So I'm a type 1 diabetic. I did suffer from a poor control in my late teens and early 20s, left home, left the shackles of my parents telling me what to do, and went off to university and drank a lot and had fun and scraped an engineering degree. But at the same time, that then later in life appeared the downside of that with a thing called diabetic retinopathy, which is a big problem in type 1 diabetics. It affects a lot of people, and basically the go into too much detail, but basically your eye decides that it's not getting enough oxygen and asks your brain to grow more blood vessels. Blood vessels in your eye, if you're inverted commas normal person, are there from birth. They're there from the start, and they stay there. In my case, I've got extra blood vessels that have grown, and they're very weak and they break. And that breaking causes fluid in the eye. You get things. The picture there is showing. The bottom of that picture is showing where the retina is actually being forced off the back of the eye by the fluid, and it can result in blindness. And the treatment for this is they laser burn off bits of your retina that you don't use or don't really use to suppress the eye asking for more oxygen. So it's fairly brutal, and it can result in sight loss. And also, if you mess around with your eyes, and this is not specific to diabetic retinopathy, this happens with other things as well, then it can lead to cataracts and other problems as well. So I have had a cataract replacement in my right eye, for example, and my right eye can now only see a very small amount, and I've got no peripheral vision at all in my right eye. So it is fairly debilitating, but it's not obvious. I mean, I'm not blind. I don't read Braille. You wouldn't know necessarily from looking at me that I've got eyesight problems. It's just one of those things that I have to live with and I adapt to. So one of the other problems I guess is what I call dark to light blindness, which is if I walk from a dark place to a light place, my eyes take quite a long time to adjust and refocus. With the result that if I do walk from a dark place somewhere in shadow into bright sunlight, then I actually get blind for a short while. My eyes adjust, and vice versa. Going from bright sunlight into a dark room, I get the same problem. And one of the key problems, I guess, is low contrast difficulties, which we'll come on to. And also an interesting one that I discovered was slow focus speed, in that I can't see through glass very often. So if someone goes past me in a car and waves at me, I won't see them because all my eyes can only focus on the windscreen and hasn't got and can't focus quickly to focus through the windscreen. So Christina, can you on to the next slide? So what's the problem that I'm here to talk about? Well, so I think until I had this problem, I was in the same boat, in that it's difficult to look at other people's perspectives, and it's so important that we do that. But how do we actually go about it? And you can see in what disabilities are well covered that it's easier to think about total loss than it is partial loss. So there is normally things for blind people, Braille, with deaf people, then obviously with sign language, and you can read, and there's also T-loops for people with partial hearing loss. But with a loss of disabilities, there isn't actually a partial loss adjustment made, and that can be quite difficult. So that's why, I mean, particularly in what I do in I specify new trains, and it's actually very important to have focus groups to come in and talk about what it is their needs are, and what improvements you can make to help them. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is to tell you what I struggle with, and therefore hopefully you can go away and apply it in your life, in your professional life, in everything that you do. So if we go to the next slide. So here's some examples I want to give you. So good contrast is really important. The reason why I've used the Australian standard here is because it's one that I used to live in Australia for a bit, worked in Australia, so I use this one quite a lot. But you need what's called a contrast factor of at least 0.3, 30%. The two boxes on the left show a black to grey 30% contrast, and the bottom box is a grey to white 30% contrast. The bottom picture is the extract from the Birdcage Walk document, which led me to write in and say, I can't read that, please can you change it? And then the picture on the right is quite an interesting one, because this is quite new, or within the last few years, and that's lifts. The top two pictures are how lifts always used to have their buttons, and they're really easy to read. The bottom picture is what is more common these days and being introduced, and I genuinely am not quite sure how this ever managed to get past disability groups, because I can't read those very often, particularly in a lot of lifts where there's dim lighting. It makes it incredibly difficult to read it, because it's all the same colour, it's silver on silver, and unless the button is pressed and therefore illuminated, then I can't see it. And I'm not going to sit there and press every single button and stop at every single floor on the way up just to get to the right one. So I have to peer very closely. I'm in my office building today, which I don't come in very often, but I did note on the way in that the lift there, it is that style, but the centre bit has been the background has been done in black, so the letters stick out in silver, and that's really good, and such a good improvement to see. you move on to the next one? So fonts are really important. Obviously, I'll give you a rail example, being in the railway industry. Recently, when the William Shapps Plan for Rail was released, one of the things that was in it was that they were going to reintroduce the rail alphabet, and people sort of scratched their heads a bit and thought, is this really important? And for me, it actually is really important. Signs on stations and in other public places have to be designed to be read while you're walking. And if they're not, it actually makes it very difficult. And so the top picture, Euston, is in the original rail alphabet. The one below, London Euston, is in the Network Rail alphabet, which, although is very similar, has actually squashed the letters closer together. And that makes it harder to read when you're walking along. So obviously, a sign that says London Euston is fairly easy to read, but other ones that say way out or toilets or various information, it can be a lot harder. And the bottom one, ScotRail, is not great, is the polite way of putting it, really. You can see the V and the I run together. It's not a helpful font, that at all, for someone who's partially sighted. So the reintroduction of the rail alphabet, particularly, you will have seen it even if you don't go to a railway station, because most airports around the world use it as well, because it is such a good font. And
Oh,
then,
yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'll just ask Andy, Christina, someone's asked if you could show the slides in presentation mode. I don't know if you've seen the message. Has it? Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
that's okay. And then, so the last few points, shape differences, toilet signs. The toilet sign on the left is, as has been used traditionally for a long time, but there's been an increasing amount of the use of the sign on the right. If those two images on the right are next to each other, that's not too bad. But if you've got, say, a ladies' toilet on one side of the room and the gents on the other, and you've got those signs, it's incredibly difficult for someone like me to actually know the difference, because both of them have got their arms by the sides, and from a distance, they actually look the same. And so I find that very difficult and end up having to walk around the whole room checking both signs before I decide which toilet I'm going to go into. And I have once nearly walked into a ladies' toilet where I had a little girl behind me saying, he's not really going to walk in, is he? So I much prefer the original sign, because the legs of the gent sign and the legs of the ladies sign are so different, it's really obvious which is which. Italics, please don't use italics as a font. It's there for emphasis. It's terrible if it's a font. It makes it very difficult to read. And then capitalizing words. Margaret Calvert, if you've ever come across her, she was the person who invented the modern road sign. And one of the big changes she did from the original old-fashioned pointy signs was that she said you need to write everything with only a capital at the front and the rest of it lowercase. And the reason for that is because you read lowercase faster than you read uppercase. If a word is completely in uppercase, your brain reads the letters individually, whereas if it's in lowercase, you look at the shape of the word and read it quickly as a whole word. The only reason why the giveaway sign, you get away with it, is because what you actually register is the shape of the sign first, and then you understand that it's a giveaway sign, so you don't really read the letters. And this is a general point. It's all right for, say, a headline. So, I mean, the IMechE standard branding guidelines have all capitals for the headline, and that's fine. But don't do a block of text in all capitals, because it makes it incredibly difficult to read. I think that's it for me, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much,
Chris.
Hi everyone. I actually decided not to provide slides for this because honestly they are often a distraction. So for what Chris was talking about in terms of making accessibility for someone who has an impairment of some kind, like ones that are like the difference being between like ones that are very apparent, such as having a guide dog, and ones that are not so apparent, such as partially losing your sight in a range of ways via like glaucoma or retinopathy. Like accessibility feels like it's just a way of making sure that everyone can do their job. But the other part of accessibility is accessibility for culture or identity. So, and again, sometimes these things are like apparent or not apparent. So it's broadly apparent to people that I meet that I'm a woman in engineering. It's less apparent that I'm also a lesbian, and it becomes apparent quite quickly because I have been able to become reasonably open about it at work. But that was definitely not always the case for me, and it actually means that, like, for example, the data on LGBTQ plus people in STEM is really hard to find. There really isn't very much of it. So to compare it for women in STEM, like, there's very clear data. They're 35% of all the students for STEM subjects. They're 25% of the graduates. They're 22% of the workforce. And then if you take it to engineering technology, they're 90% of the students, they're 15% of the graduates, and they're 10% of the workforce. But if you wanted to look at those numbers for LGBTQ plus in STEM, it's just sort of a bit of a guess. So there's a bit of a guess that about 5% of all engineers worldwide are probably LGBTQ plus. And in the UK, there's a bit of a guess that about 30% of all queer engineers are out at work. So if you think about the number of queer, like the number of queer people that you know and where you work, times that number by 3, because there are 2 people you don't. And why including people for identity reasons is important is it's about not having to waste your internal resources on hiding part of yourself. So when people, like, I think we can all agree, when people are happy at work, they do good work, they're able to contribute more fully to conversations, they're more fun, they're more relaxed, they're like people who are less stressed, take less time off. But in my first job, certainly I was absolutely not out at work, and so there was always like this background process running in my mind about make sure you don't use pronouns, and when other people are talking about what they're doing with their family, you don't join that conversation. And you worry about I worried a lot about what I wear and how I looked, because it was already hard enough being a woman in engineering and probably being the only one in the office, to also be probably the only queer person in the office was not something that I wanted for myself. And even though there's been quite a lot of progress, I remember a news story from before the pandemic where a woman was beaten up on her own, like she was on her way home from work, she was beaten up basically outside her house because she was wearing a tie. And you can all see from the video that I wear like a button-down collar shirt and a tie and a waistcoat, and that's how I like to dress for work. It makes me feel professional, but I shouldn't. I'm always carrying a little bit of that. Who is going to have a problem with me because of the way I look? And it's much easier for me if I'm able to just put those fears aside in certain places. And I spent quite a lot of time at work. You know, we're spending like 40 hours of work, 40 hours a week doing our job, and it's one of the places where I should feel safe. And inclusive language and inclusive communications um, go into that feeling of safety. And I think I do better work, and I certainly have more fun when I'm able to be relaxed at work.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing that. I know, it's a very personal part, to share with everyone. So really appreciate that. And I agree. Instead of wasting your resources on thinking how people will perceive you and will react to you being who you are, it's just not sustainable, right? And you want to spend that energy focusing, doing your best in the job you love and you want to do. So I hope this brings the message to everyone, that it is so crucial and so important to create those safe spaces, that inclusive environment, workspace where everyone can feel themselves and not think of, oh, I need to hide this, I can't be myself. because it does affect us, our mental health. It does affect our work, how well we are doing, our interactions, our collaboration with teams. It affects everything. And how amazing would it be if we were more, kind to each other, more curious about each other, um, you would encourage a very, very pleasant space to work. And you're right, we work 40 hours a week at least, right? Some of us more, and we want to have a pleasant experience, of course. Thank you so much, and thank you, Chris, for sharing that. It's been so eye-opening, talking about partial sight loss. I definitely learned something new, because I didn't know about quite a lot of things you just described, and it's really good to keep in mind. And there's so simple things. It's not that difficult to make these changes, and it will benefit quite a lot of people, I think. So yeah, I just wanted, whilst we're waiting for people, if you have any questions from our attendees, please drop them in the chat function. In the meantime, I just wanted to pick up with you, Emily. I know when we talked previously, you said that you've developed a few inclusive communications guide for your company or for your previous company. Could you tell us more about it, and perhaps a few highlights from that guide, or any aha moments from people when they're like, oh, I actually didn't think about that. That's quite interesting. Like some highlights would be really nice to hear from you.
So we laid it out using the 9 protected characteristics from the Equality Act 2010, because that felt like a good structure. And so we were able to, we went through based on gender and whether you're LGBTQ, and like sometimes it felt like quite easy to just be like, actually just don't say that. So we'd started off saying, like, don't call your colleagues darling, because that's going to make some people uncomfortable and it's a bit patronizing. But when we got down to race and disability, we were like, we can't, we don't feel like we can print some of the words that you're not meant to say. So we circled back on the document and went, well, how about we turn it into, instead of use and don't use, we turned it into respectful and like disrespectful. I think we actually just said respectful and disrespectful. We made it a point of treating people with respect rather than it being this like we didn't want it to feel like, because the document came out of HR, and I know a lot of people were like, I'm not doing what HR tell me to, they don't know what my job is like. So we wanted to make it about, like, this is about treating people with respect, and we're not telling you what to do. But have you thought about, instead of saying, who's manning the stand, have you thought about, have we got a person in the stand? Have we got enough resourcing to make sure that there's someone there all day? And instead of talking about like manned access and manned ways, we're just like, well, if like you don't just want men going in there, you want trained operators in there. So think about, it's part of it was trying to think about what you actually want to say. Like what you want to say is you want the area restricted to like someone who is suitably qualified, experienced, or you want to restrict it to operators. So it's operator access, and you can, these changes in language are actually like, it's just a tweak of a habit, and it can make life quite a lot easier. Like if people like a request went out for it was an invitation to expressions of interest or a promotion, but all of the qualities of for the person in the promotion, they had he in front of them, and I was like, they're never going to give me this job. They don't want me in that job. And I actually just went and got a job somewhere else. I was just like, oh, okay, I'm done here. And like whether they meant that or not, they lost me. And it's so often actually not a necessary part of the document to describe an individual. Like when you're talking about someone doing the job, you don't go, well, they need to be between their 40s and 50s. So you don't need to say whether they're a man or a woman. You don't need to say like whether they're white or they're black. You just, if you you don't need to use any way of, like, you don't have to, like, you can just avoid describing a person altogether and describe them in terms of competence. And that, I think, actually works really well, especially for engineering, because what we care about the most is whether someone is appropriately trained and is competent to do the work. So that was sort of the methodology that we used to try and write that document. And most people just seemed very chill with it, but I challenged someone a couple of years ago because they, like a scissor lift, just went walking and then came back, and someone sent an email complaining about all the man hours that had been wasted. And I just sent an email going, actually, could you just, like, you wasted a lot of person hours, you wasted a lot of resource, or you just wasted a lot of time. And they snapped back with a screenshot of a dictionary. And I'm like, okay, you don't love that. Like, number one is a dictionary is a record. It's not a record of how we communicate. It's a record of how we used to communicate. Like, it's not actually how we speak. And so I linked him to the guidance document on respectful language and pointed him to the paragraph specifically. And I said, well, the dictionary might say that, but the internal document for where you work says this. And then he complained to my boss about my attitude. And my boss told him to go away. But that wasn't the first or the last time that someone complained to my boss that I was being unnecessarily opinionated about wanting to be treated like a human being at work.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily. And yeah, when you have so much resistance, sometimes you have to be really bold and really, you know, take that sometimes hard steps to telling people, you know, actually, please, you know, there are some guidelines, there's some limits, you know, please could you be respectful? And that's a, you know, it is hard sometimes. And I'm glad you have a supporting manager. And as you highlighted, I really like that you know, language is ever evolving, and what have been acceptable a few years ago is not acceptable. It might not be so acceptable or welcome today. So it's really good to keep that curiosity, and those inclusive communications guides, you know, are a really good way. We should be looking at ours as well, I think, to be updating and, you know, being in line with the time when we're living in. So. Margaret Ann, do you want to step in? I know we've got a question in the chat, a couple of questions now. Thank you. You are on.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. I just wanted to mention something that I should have mentioned when I did my piece. One is on our website. We have an accessibility widget, which is a fantastic resource. If you look at our website, you'll see a maroon figure on the right of the page as you look. And that allows you to adjust the page. You can change it to dyslexia-friendly fonts. It allows you to increase the size of the text. It allows you to increase the contrast. And it also allows you to create a bar, so you can just highlight the area of text that you're reading and allow this bar to move up and down the page. It's really good. So I definitely ask people to have a look at that. As Christina, yeah, there's Christina showing up. So
contrast.
Yeah. Dyslexia friendly fonts, there's animations, there's line height, it changes that, text align. So this is on the front of the web, on our web page, and it appears on every page, and that's great. And there's a couple of comments. One, thank you very much. We've had a comment in the chat about our log-on verification being very difficult to read. We'll take that away and have a look at that. And Andrew, there was a question about our guidelines on inclusion and diversity best practice. Yes, we have our inclusive communications guide, which I'm sure Christina will put a link in the chat. And as we said, we are going to look to update it. It's a document we did a couple of years ago, and it will need some revision. So we'll be going out actually to asking people what content people think should be included in it. We've got some best practice actually for visually impaired, but this is sort of use of language at the back from the RNIB, so there might be more that Chris might want to add. And I just wanted to ask Chris, in your experience, have you had any changes, you know, in terms of partially the requests for changes that have been made at work? Any examples of things that have really made a difference to you that we should be considering?
Excuse me. I don't think, I mean, I'm fortunate in the position I'm in. I'm in a very small company, and I'm in charge of the style and guidelines. So I just change everything to suit what I know works and what and get rid of. I mean, you know, clearly there are times where things don't work, but in my previous employer, then they reached out for me to the ONIB to look at getting extra funding for bigger screens and various bits and bobs. So there's definitely help out there. I think there is a slight downside in it, in that when and this is just something to be aware of, when the RNIB assessor came to see me, the first thing they said to me was, do you think you have a disability? And I said, well, no, not really. I mean, I don't like to walk around saying with a label saying that I'm disabled. I mean, I don't think I am. I can't drive, but because my eyesight's not quite good enough, but I can see everything. It's just that some things are difficult. And he said, well, I can't help you unless you say you're disabled, basically. So I had to say I've got a disability before he could then offer me anything, which I think, I mean, that for me was quite a bit of a shock, really. I mean, so I think it's a great resource. It's there, it could be used, but I think even there you can see where what people might consider usual language, or what they would consider as being acceptable language, actually might not be to someone.
Yeah, there sometimes feels like there's a lot of resistance to, even like to everyone like identifying with the idea of having a disability. And one of my favorite comedians who is not safe for work is a woman called Rosie Jones, and she has cerebral palsy, and she's very funny and also extremely not safe for work. But she did part of the Paralympic coverage for Channel 4 with The Last Leg, and she was really resistant. She was really resistant to getting a mobility scooter, even though the long days and how much walking she was having to do was like, it was causing her pain. She felt like getting this mobility scooter was like giving in. And I think like people, they feel like that a lot. I've seen it a lot with people who need an adjustment or an aid to being able to access the world. And I heard a great podcast talking about the difference between disability and impairment, and I feel like people are disabled by the world, by society. I like, as well as being a woman in engineering and gay in engineering, I'm also autistic and dyslexic. So I'm just carrying stuff around with me, like, and even though, like, if you look at the definition on the Equality Act, certainly with the autism, I probably count as disabled for terms of like discrimination, but I don't feel I'm disabled by my autism. Like, but the way the world acts around me, like that can actually end up cutting me out of things. And a number, like, sometimes you ask people to explain the rules and they're like, I don't even know what this question means. And that, I think sometimes that's the thing. Like, Chris, I feel like you understand that you're impaired by the damage to your eyes, but you don't feel like you're disabled. But you still, like, there are still things that can be done to help you in terms of like color contrast and font choice and font size. And I actually didn't know the IMechE website did dyslexia font. It's actually my favorite font. It makes it so easy to read things. I was like, oh, great. Yeah.
No,
So
it's great that you've that you can see the widget, because we've, you know, more people can see that it's there, it's the better it is. I'm sort of conscious that we've got a couple more minutes. We've had a couple of questions just in the chat. I don't know if Emily or Chris have any views. What are the panel's views on the use of titles, Mr. Mrs.? Do they just reinforce views on matrimonial status, gender, etc.? Should be looking to avoid them, or expect people to expect. I don't know if there's an answer in a nutshell, because I know we're just coming to the end of
I have quite a short answer to this. I am married, and I married a priest, and if someone says to her, "What is your title?" she'll say Ms. And if someone says, "Are you Miss or Mrs?" she'll go, "It's Reverend, actually." Like, she'll really like push back on that. She doesn't mind being called Ms generally, and neither do I. But the yeah, like it is a problem. Like, people make some assumptions. I have a friend with a PhD, and she handed over her card to buy a ticket on the train, and the ticket guy was just like, "You've given me your husband's card because it said Dr. C. Davies." And I'm like, that's not going to go around. I think like people can be quite comfortable and quite enjoy the idea of I am Mrs. I like being part of a family. I like that indicates something about myself. And actually, this probably applies to damn near everything. Like, most people would just prefer if you asked. If you want to know someone's title for reasons, you're like, could you tell me what your title is? And then they'll tell you what they want to be called. And that's, I think,
It's asking. It's
yeah,
asking people, as you say, it's
ask.
asking people their preference.
Yeah, how would you like me to talk about you? And it's the same with like, if someone would prefer to be they instead of he or she. It's just like, just ask.
Oh, well, thank you.
I think as well, sorry if I could just jump in. I mean, for me, it's, I'm a white heterosexual male married to, I've got a wife and 2 kids. It's, I'm the stereotypical, the world created norm, which we're trying to get rid of. And yes, it's very easy for me that I can just put Mr. on any of those forms. I actually prefer, I don't like people calling me Mr. Hoskin, for example. I much prefer call me Chris Hoskin. That's my name. My name's Chris. It's not Mr. So, that's a lot easier. The only one that I would say, which maybe the IMechE could drive, is, obviously in Europe they use ing for engineer, and I would love it if we could have eng for engineer, because that's what we are. We're not Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, or what we are is engineers, and that is our title.
That would be fun.
Well, that's a good. Oh, that is a good note to a good note to end on. A good thought for for IMechE and everything. So great. I know it's coming up to 1:45. We've come to the end of our discussion. And I can see there's some great questions. So we haven't been able to get to many of the questions, but I do hope, give us some feedback on the discussion. We've got our document. I'm really delighted to see some comments in the chat that people have used the widget as well, because it's something there. It's great. And I would like to thank both of our speakers as well, and to Christina for organising this. And it might be an event we might look to repeat, and it's great to hear people's personal experiences. I don't know.
Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. It has been a really good team effort putting this together. It's the first time we're doing something like this. I will greatly receive your feedback on board, and hopefully do a next one, hopefully next year. Thank you so much, and have a good, fantastic rest of your day, everyone.
And also, I just wanted to add, if people do have comments on issues like with the website, like the log-on, do feel free to email us. There's a diversity on our diversity page. There's a diversity@imeche.org, and Christina manages that inbox, and so we'll sort out the pages. But if you do see problems, like Chris came to us with a problem, and in fact Emily came to us with another problem which we haven't got into, but people have come to us with issues, and we are responsive, and we really value your feedback and the suggestions that you have.
Yes.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Bye. Thanks, Emily, Chris. Bye-bye.